Hello, algebra students. Today is going to be a nice short lesson. It's really combining two things that we already know, or just reviewing today, two things that we already know, because tomorrow we're going to be putting these together. So we've been working on compound inequalities. That's where we've got the ands or the ors, or we might have the three-part kind of inequalities for the ands. And a while ago, we already solved absolute value equations. Tomorrow, we're going to have absolute value inequalities. So we're really going to be putting these two things together into a mashup. But for today, we're just going to review these two topics. So in this first one, again, a problem like this with the word or. Typically, that's going to mean I'm getting the two outside parts of my graph, probably. And remember, the stuff on the left problem doesn't touch the stuff on the right problem. These are not like I can't combine one thing from one equation or inequality into the other one. So when I'm taking a look at this first inequality on the left side, I would start by doing a keep, change. And we're going to get rid of our 10. So I've got negative 2x is greater than 10. When I divide by negative 2, remember, that's going to flip my sign. Anytime you multiply or divide by a negative, so now instead of a greater than, it's going to be a less than negative 5. In the second problem, again, I would do a keep, change. Let's get rid of our 2. So I have a negative 3x is less than negative 15. Also going to divide by a negative on this part of the problem, trying to force that often so you get that refresher. When we multiply or when we divide by that negative, we're going to have to flip our sign, and that's a positive 5. So on this graph, the first part that we got was that x was less than negative 5. So right here is negative 5. It's going to be an open circle. And less than means it's going out here this way. Or the other part is starting at positive 5, open circle, and greater than is going to go that way. Again, this is what our typical or kind of problems look like. We get the two outsides of a graph. They don't always necessarily have opposites like 5 and negative 5, but it's almost always just going to be going on the outsides. This problem is actually from your worksheet today, so I would suggest that you make sure that you write down that this is problem number 5 when you're working on this. And typically means that we're going to get the middle section of a graph, right? We've looked at possibilities where it might be a no solution. It might be everything going one direction, so we have to be careful about that. That's not a typical kind of graph, and this is not written as a three-part inequality, so we would want to keep these two parts separate, just like we do for the OR. This problem, though, has variables on both sides of the inequality, on the left problem and on the right problem. So I'm going to move my smaller variable, which is my 6x. So I would have 1x, or just x, plus 9 is greater than or equal to 4. So we'll get rid of our 9. X is greater than or equal to negative 5. In the right problem, when I ask which variable is smaller, be careful because I have a 3x and I have a negative 5x. So I would want to change that so I can see if that's actually a negative 5. I would add 5x. That's the smaller variable. That's the one that I want to get rid of. So I have negative 2 plus 8x is less than 6. So then we'll get rid of our 2. Okay, and again, remember, this is where we are looking at probably getting a middle section. So from my first problem, I knew that it was going to be starting at negative 5 with a filled in circle, and I know that it's a greater than, so it's going to be going this way. For the second problem, the right-hand problem, we would start at positive 1, but it'll be an open circle, and it's going to the left. So here is the overlap. Here's the stuff that makes both of those inequalities true. If we wanted to write this, instead of having this word and in between these two parts, I could write this as that three-part kind of an inequality. So negative 5 is the smallest thing that I have. That's all of my shading as my x, and here's the 1. So we're less than 1, and the x is bigger than -5. So like the alligator would try to be eating a -5. Again, that's one of your homework problems or your practice problems today. This one's not directly from your worksheet, but this is now the review stuff. Inequalities. I'm sorry, absolute values. When we solve this, we want to get the absolute value part by itself, and then we write two separate equations and solve them. So my first step here is I need to get rid of this subtracting 4. So I have my absolute value equals 20. This is where my two equations now come in. Remember, that stuff that's in the absolute value, that's 20 units away. So that could go positive 20 or negative 20. So I would have, my two equations are going to be negative 10r minus 10 could be equal to 20, or negative 10r minus 10 could be equal to negative 20. And now I have to solve both of these. So I have that negative 10r equals 30. Now this is just an equation, so when I divide by a negative, it doesn't really change, like I don't have to flip a sign because flipping an equal sign doesn't do anything. This is just going to be -3. In the second problem, it's the exact same steps, but we get a different result. So negative 10r equals negative 10 this time. Divide by negative 10, and I'm going to get that r is equal to 1. So here are my two answers. Remember, you can check this by substituting them back into the original problem. So if I would put the -3, for instance, right there for the r, negative 10 times -3 would be positive 30, minus 10 would be 20, and we're taking the absolute value of that, which is 20, minus 4 is 16. That one works. If I put a 1 in that spot, I would have negative 10 times 1 is going to be negative 10 minus 10. Now remember, that's an absolute value. That's going to be the absolute value of negative 20, which is positive 20 minus 4 also gives me 16. They both work. You can always check them by substituting. So here's another problem right from your worksheet today. Remember, the first step is I need to get the absolute value all by itself. So I have to get rid of that -6. Remember, we do not ever, 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 ever distribute into absolute value. To get rid of multiplying by -6, I'm going to divide by -6, which gives me my absolute value equals -8. And then here, I hope you remember this. Absolute value can't be equal to a negative. Absolute value is a distance. So this is actually not possible. No solution. If you ever get an absolute value all by itself and it says it equals negative number, can't do it. However, number 12, also from your worksheet, is not going to be a no solution. This one is as tricky as we can make it, basically. I've got two things to get rid of just to get my absolute value part by itself. So I've got 5 times my absolute value plus 6 equals 56. Remember, think about that absolute value like a giant variable. So it's like 5x plus 6. I would have to get rid of the plus 6 part first. So I'm going to have 5 times my absolute value. And then again, we don't distribute, even though the 5 is positive, we do not distribute into absolute value. I'm going to divide by 5. So I'm going to get my absolute value finally by itself. 4v plus 10, make that a little bit bigger, equals 10. Now, two problems. 4v plus 10 equals 10. 4v plus 10 equals -10. At this point, a two-step equation should be pretty easy. We're going to get rid of our 10. So 4v equals 0. So v is 0. There's one of our answers. For the other problem, when I do those same steps, again, different results, I'm going to get that 4v equals -20. So v equals -5. And again, feel free to substitute those back in there and check, but they both work. The rest of that worksheet, so we just did 3 of the 12 problems. You have 9 problems left. Some of them are just compound inequalities, which we have now spent a great deal of time on. And some of them are the absolute value equations that you need to solve. Make sure that you're showing your work. It's quite a bit of work to show, especially on those absolute values, because we get 2 equations. When you finish with that, make sure that you take the formative quiz that's in Schoology and let me know if you need any help.